Okay, we should be live. Let me just go ahead and check on the health of this stream here. Before we get in and dig into anything. You gotta give it a minute because sometimes it doesn't take right away. Okay. Alright, yeah, it says we're up. I'm gonna put the link in the channel in case you guys want to yeah, let me give you the link to it real fast. Where is it here? Excuse me, guys. We're gonna start the stream off a little slowly, just to let some people trickle in and make sure the stream's up and everything. All right, so I put the link in the chat so you guys can disseminate it to whoever might want to watch it. But I guess we could start right quick here with some introductions. We'll start with our guest here, Jordan, also known as On the Other Hand on YouTube. Definitely check out his channel. In fact, let me put a link to your channel in the description. I forgot to do that.
No worries.
Because it is a great channel where you have some really thoughtful and interesting content. If you're into any kind of politics or religion or anything like that, definitely check his channel out. It's really good stuff. So, Jordan, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and tell us about why you decided to start up a YouTube channel.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, hello everyone. My name is Jordan from On the Other Hand. I don't know. I've always really enjoyed YouTube, and I consume a lot of content. And as I listen to particularly creators I like talk about, excuse me, talk about different challenges being a YouTuber, specifically hearing conservative YouTubers talk about being blacklisted or having issues with monetization, kind of piqued my curiosity. And there were things that just got inside my head, and I started making YouTube videos, and it lifted stuff off my chest, and I don't know. I wasn't very political growing up. My parents weren't very political. They always taught me to, vote. Voting's important, researching who you vote for. But it wasn't until the 2016 election where I just vaguely knew Trump was a jerk, and I vaguely knew that Hillary was crooked. And I'm like, well, I don't like either of those options, so I just didn't vote. I remember waking up after the 2016 election was over, went to sleep, and everyone's like, oh, Hillary's going to win. Woke up and everybody's like, oh, Trump won. I just remember thinking, is that a good thing? I don't know. Should I have researched? I have no idea. And so at the time I was in college, and my younger brother started showing me Ben Shapiro videos, and I was intrigued. I'm a big fan of arguments. I'm a big fan of getting down to the nitty-gritty and figuring out where you stand and watching people duke it out verbally over big ideas. So I kind of got hooked, kind of started watching more conservative YouTubers. And there's different people I've found and I've liked. But there were times when there were just subjects that I felt like weren't treated with enough nuance, or just weren't done well, or didn't get the right attention. And so, as silly as this sounds, the first one that really bugged me was a Vox video on driving slowly in the left lane. And feel free to hate me, anybody who's listening in the chat or otherwise. I'm one of those people who gets annoyed if I'm driving the speed limit and someone is tailgating me. I try to move over, but sometimes, anyway, I'm one of those weirdos who sticks to the speed limit. And this particular Vox video, I just remember it coming out and all my friends being like, yeah, anybody who drives the speed limit is horrible. I'm like, there are some legitimate times where I'm passing someone's going slow the speed limit, and people are tailgating me, and it bugs me, and people are like, no, it's more dangerous. And so one of the first video ideas I ever had was this Vox video, because I'm a crazy person who thought that Vox oversimplified things. Come to find out, Vox oversimplifies almost anything. But um, I just started to make videos, and I just put out stuff that I feel like I don't know, feel like people could talk more about. I chose On the Other Hand because Fiddler on the Roof is a favorite movie of mine, and there are times where the main character weighs different options on hard decisions, and he's like, on the one hand, this, but on the other hand, this, but on the other hand, and I just felt like there needs to be more of that in the world. So I come up with an idea, something bugs me, I see a YouTube video I want to respond to, I'm like, why not make a video on it? So yeah, that's me. On the Other Hand, and exclusively here, my name is Jordan, as I will probably be referred to through the rest of the stream. But yeah, that's pretty much about me.
Probably just because that's On the Other Hand's a bit of a mouthful, but I agree. You have a lot of really interesting points to share. Like I like your series on the what is it, divisive definitions? Is that what it's called?
Yep.
That's very interesting because it it does a good job of sitting there and saying, hey, we throw these words around a lot, but what are we actually saying to each other? What does this actually mean? Has anyone actually stopped to think about it? And I think that you digging into those things a little bit, and they're not long videos, they're only a few minutes usually, but it's just that amount of looking into stuff is so much more than what we get usually that it becomes really valuable. And I do think you do a very good job of trying not to demonize any side. Like the one video you had, you were talking about, was it Sean and free speech, and him basically saying that everyone I disagree with should be banned from the internet. And it was that's a doozy. And Sean, I think what you do a good job of is avoiding becoming Sean, in that you are making sure you aren't demonizing any side and going, look, let's actually listen to what these people are saying, or what would be a legitimate argument that someone who disagrees with you could put forward. You know, so the positions you put forward I enjoy, because you're saying there is always room for discourse here, and we're just not getting it. And channels like yours allow us to actually have this discourse. So definitely check out On the Other Hand on YouTube. It's pretty. You search it. On the Other Hand, filter by channel. It's like the first or second thing there. It's really easy to find. But let's go ahead and go around the rest of the panel here. I guess, and talk about your introduction, real quick blurb about who you are, as much as you're willing to say, and then any political background that you have. So let's go ahead and do Cicero, and then after Cicero we'll do Alex, and then I'll share my origin, because I'll probably rant a little bit.
Sure. So I'll try to make it quick. So basically, I'm the child of two immigrants. Both of them come from countries that had very authoritarian governments, though not necessarily left or right wing. But so both of them, and so through that way, I kind of grew up, knowing a lot about authoritarianism and really not liking it. And so, and through that, I mean, that's kind of always been my political leanings. And I was very into like stocks and business stuff when I was young, so that kind of just led to me being more into right-wing politics generally. And so, like I've dabbled in libertarianism and I've looked into all sorts of, anti-authoritarianism, right-wing stuff, but that's generally where I am. And that's basically, in general, my philosophy. I don't like to identify as anything specifically, because I always end up having like contrary opinions, and I feel like it kind of boxes you in whatever you identify as. So that's generally where I am. If you have any more specific questions, throw them at me. But yeah, I think that's a good summary.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. You're not too like. There's I know a couple people that you would say are right wing and legitimately are right wing, and you're definitely not rise to that at all. There are a lot of times where I'm a somewhat conservative. We'll get into that in a bit, but we'll go over some things, and you usually, not usually, but a lot of the times will have a more liberal position than I do, but we have a good discussion about it. So I definitely think that you probably, from somebody looking at you from the outside, I think you've hit the nail on the head. That it's not, and I think a lot of us are going to also say that as well, that, well, I don't necessarily like this label because it doesn't really cover everything about me. So I think we're going to hit that a bit. But if you're good to go, then Alex, if you go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Absolutely, everybody. Hello, my name is Alex, and just a quick rundown. I'm originally from rural America, but I moved around a lot, including overseas, and also lived in cities and currently in the suburbs. As far as political leanings, so I first started to really pay attention to politics around, I'd say, 2007. So I didn't really know much about the Bush administration or anything like that. But I really did start to look at what candidates had to say in 2007. Interestingly enough, originally, even though I wasn't old enough to vote for the 2008 election, I did like Obama before he became the candidate and before he adopted all of the regular DNC viewpoints and everything. So originally a supporter of him, but and then when I became old enough to register, which was around 2011, I actually signed up, and I was originally a Democrat. And very quickly, I realized that I had made a mistake, that those were not my people, even though I thought that I had pretty Democratic leanings as far as what I believed in. But the people I'm definitely not progressive. And so 2012 was the first election that I voted in, and I was a Democrat who voted for Romney, which is kind of weird. Probably won't meet too many of them, and that's just because I didn't switch in time. So right after that election, I switched over to Republican. 2016, I joined the Trump train, and haven't looked back since. I'll take Trump in 2020 over creepy, sleepy, sniffy Joe. So I guess more about just where I stand personally. I'm definitely not a hardcore conservative. I do value religion. I do believe in more power to local government and more power to the citizens rather than a overarching federal authoritarian type deal. And weirdly enough, somewhere in all of this Republicanness of me, I do have a very big green thumb. I am a tree hugger, so do like nature.
That's that I think is interesting, because for some reason Republicans get this rap that they hate the environment, but
they do.
But
absolutely.
Well, they have the rap, but I don't think that's true. Well, maybe we'll get into it later, but the short of it is, I find many Republicans are the outdoorsy type and very much don't want the outdoors to be destroyed. So I think there's as many of us, many of the reasons why we're here, there's a lot more nuance to that discussion than is currently in the zeitgeist. But I'll go over a little bit about my background. Alex and I don't know, we've known each other for quite a long time, actually, since I don't know, like mid 2000s, and we went to school together and stuff. So I'm also from the backwoods and the middle of nowhere, but I've done that, and I'm living in a more suburban environment, and I notice a lot of these class differences that you usually don't. That is kind of, it's not common to talk about in America. It's a lot more common in like the United Kingdom, but there definitely are differences. It's a lot more rural versus city, as opposed to like working class and middle class and upper class kind of thing. Like we don't have lords or anything like that, but there still is a difference. And I think a lot of my political journey has been from being from rural America and Like the first job I ever did anything was shoveling shit on a horse farm. That was my first job. And I think stuff like that, coming from that area and understanding people from that area, I think really helped me going forward, because I remember a couple of years ago when I was finishing up my degree, I was in a political science class because I took it as an elective. I said, why not? And I was the only person that was even remotely right-leaning in that entire class. There was like 20 kids in there. I was also the oldest one there, interestingly enough. I was like in my mid-20s, and they were all in their 18, 19, 20, 21. And it was amazing to me the view that these people had on the Republican Party and Republicans in general, like what kind of people they were. And I'm just like, this is entirely outdated. They're talking about Republicans like it's 1980. It's not. This is not your This isn't your dad's. These aren't your dad's Republicans. They're different. They're not stuck in these supposedly old ways. You know, like I'm from an area where, like I said, my first job was shoveling horse shit. Our school kids drove their tractors to school sometimes. You know, like that's as middle America as you can get, and the vast majority of them were not racists, were not sexists, were not homophobes. Nobody cared. I think what a lot of happened there was I saw how the Democrats and those who bought into the Democrat narrative, and I'm talking about the party level, not the individuals. The Democratic Party as an institution has painted Republicans as racist, sexist, homophobes that are rednecks that live in shacks in the middle of nowhere, right? And they have all these horrible, intolerant beliefs, and it's just simply not true. It's just simply not true. And that really bothered me. In terms of my affiliations, I've always been a registered Republican, but I've never let that stop me from voting for Democrats. I voted for several Democrats at local and state levels when I felt like they're the better candidate. So I don't think in terms of Republicans versus Democrats necessarily. There are a bunch of Republicans I think are retarded. You know, they're stupid, and it really bothers me. But in the end, I just end up siding with them more often than not. So that's why I do that. I voted, for example, Libertarian in 2016. I was like, Donald Trump's a jerk. Hillary Clinton is not fit for purpose. She's basically a criminal that just the FBI decided to let her off, like with the classified information in her emails. That was ridiculous, and she should have been charged with that, but she wasn't. So she was a criminal. Trump was a jerk. I didn't want to vote for any of them. I voted for Johnson. I said, I'm going to vote for a Libertarian because I'm tired of this. And then 2018 rolls around, and I see the Covington kids scandal. And I've seen this stuff before, and we can get into this a little bit later if we want to. But I've seen this inability to give Trump the benefit of the doubt of anything. Every time there was an issue, something happened, always negative against Trump, even when he was right. Even when he made the right decision, still bad, always bad, orange man bad constantly. And it really bothered me. And then I saw the Covington kids scandal, where they were willing to destroy children's lives in order to further a political goal of going after Trump. And I said, the entire basis for people hating Trump, not the entire, but the vast majority of the basis for hating Trump in this country all come from the media. They've said he's a racist, he's a sexist, he's a homophobe, he's a jerk, he says mean things. And I'm like, but hang on a second. They were so willing to ruin people's lives for a false narrative, what was proven false, just to get at this guy politically. How many other lies have they been telling about him? And it made me dig into it a little bit more, and this could be, hours and hours of discussion, but to make it short, in 2018 I decided I support Trump because I realized that the media had been twisting a narrative for the past, at that point, 2.5-3 3 years about this guy that just the vast majority of it just wasn't true. There's plenty of things you can dislike Trump about, but the things they actually go after him for are just false. They're just not true, or they're concocted. They're completely twisted beyond reality, and it really bothered me, especially because I have some training in journalism, and I was like, this is too easy to get right. Why is this so hard for these people that make that are supposedly the best journalists in this country? How is it so that they get this wrong on a consistent basis? So sorry about that rant. Like 10 minutes of me just going off about my political background, but that's not the entirety of this video. I think, did anybody want to comment on any of that before we move on?
Yeah, I have a quick comment. I just wanted to say real quick, little side story, but I just talked to people over 4th of July, people in my family that still believed that the Covington Catholic thing was the fault of the student. So it just goes to show the media never really apologized for that. And that's why the guy's suing them and winning.
Yeah. And Jordan, you wanted to say something?
I just think it's funny. You talking about your first job. My dad always jokes he got his PhD at a real young age, his post-hole digging degree. And he said that was the moment when he realized, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that pushed him on to go to college and get an education, because he spent a summer doing that, and he's like, nope.
Yeah, that sucks. So if we're good with that, we can go ahead and move on to a couple of the topics. We've got 1 or 2 topics here that we wanted to cover, to sort of see where we all come down on these things. Specifically, I think we wanted to hit on the 2 + 2 = 5 debate, if you could call it that. It was on Twitter mostly, I believe, this past week or two. Basically, the long and short of it is, I believe it was James Lindsay poked the bear on the internet. And he was like, he basically goaded these critical theorists into arguing why 2 + 2 = 5. And there's some craziness about that I think we should definitely touch on. How's that sound to y'all? We want to talk about 2 + 2 = 5?
That sounds great.
Absolutely.
Right. So a bit of background. My degree is in computer science, and there's a lot of math in computer science. So I like to think of myself as somewhat math oriented. And when I saw people talking about 2 + 2 = 5, I was like, this has to be a joke. There's no way this is true. But basically, there are people that are attempting to argue about 2 + 2 = 5 from the perspective of language, and which most postmodern theories do. But I think the way they did it was particularly interesting. So let me go ahead. If you guys want to chat a little bit, I'm going to go find some tweets here real quick to illustrate my point, because I want to try to start us off with showing there is actually a discussion about this before people say we're conspiracy theorists, because this is not a conspiracy. People are actually discussing this.
I just think it's so funny where we hit a point that parody, that trolls are taken so seriously. Like it's something that's so absurd on its face, and yet people are talking about it and discussing it as if this was actually something that merits discussion. It's crazy to me. I don't know about you guys.
Well, so if I'm going to be as charitable as possible, technically, if we're being very, very, very technical, 2 + 2 can equal 5 if you define 2 as 2.5, or if you define 5 as 4 or whatever.
Okay.
That's the whole point, right? It's a language. But the problem with the whole discussion, I think at least, if we're going to start getting into that now, is, I mean, just think about it for 2 seconds, right? The purpose of language is to be useful. And just saying 2 + 2 = 5 and not defining it is, I mean, first of all, the first thing people think of is 1984 when you say 2 + 2 = 5. But even outside of that, it's not a useful proposition to say that 2 plus 2 equals 5, because it's so outside of thinking of the average human being and what we think of when we think of, what 2 and plus and 2 and equal and 5 mean, that it doesn't, it's not in the realm of something that is even useful to really discuss, unless your only goal is to redefine terms for your own purpose.
Well, that's the thing. That's exactly the goal. So I've got to... Go ahead.
No, I just want to say Newspeak. That's the new. It's going to be in the Newspeak dictionary. That's what
it is. Newspeak. It is Newspeak. So there's a couple. Jordan, do you have any comments on this? Because I'm about to go on a absolute rant about this, and I want to make sure everyone else gets their points in before I steal the floor for a while.
Oh, rant away.
Okay, so let me put up on screen here so you guys can see. This is not something I pulled out of my ass. Just a moment. I gotta get this sitting just right. So this is a tweet from James Lindsay, at Conceptual James on Twitter. Definitely follow him. Real interesting stuff about critical theory, postmodernism. Where does all these crazy things you read in the news, where is this stuff coming from? He has the answers for that. Him, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose. The three of them have done excellent work with this stuff. It's really dry and highbrow academic stuff, so if that's such a thing, it might be difficult, but I think everyone that can read should take a look at what they have to say, because it's so, understanding these things are so fundamental, especially if you're kind of put off by it, you're not exactly sure why. Give it a listen to them. They have some really good points. But basically what he says here is he's arguing about why 2 plus 2 equals 5 is this language game, right? And there's a link to his article he wrote in his website, The New Discourses. But basically, it goes into like what Cicero was saying about language and all these things. Basically, the argument is 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a social construct, and we throw that around a bit. It's a bit pejorative anymore when you say social construct, but what they really mean is that humans have decided that 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? That it's not some law of nature that it has to be this way. We could define 2 as 2.5, and now 2 plus 2 equals 5, right? But there's several problems with this. The first one being, this is almost always presented. This isn't a technical explanation. I will get to the technical stuff in a minute. 2 plus 2 equals 5 is almost always presented as the counter to the white male version of math that came about as a result of imperialism, right? That like 2 plus 2 equals 4 is somehow the only thing that we have now, because white males, were imperialistic in the 18th and 19th centuries and conquered most of the world, and then pushed out 2 plus 2 equals 4 and stopped people from believing 2 plus 2 equals 4. But that's not the case. People, and we'll get to why in a minute, and so bear with me until then. People knew 2 plus 2 equals 4 in Africa before a white man set foot on there to collect slaves. Like, that 2 plus 2 has always equaled 4. And even people who aren't white say 2 plus 2 equals 4. Hell, the numerals we use came from India through the Arabs, the Muslim Arabs in like after the fall of the Roman Empire. All of Europe used Roman numerals until the Arabs introduced Hindu numerals, which we know as Arabic numerals, right? So this isn't just some white thing. Like, the Indians and then the Arabs developed a system where we use 10 different digits to represent 10 different numbers, and then we decimalized it so you can add tens, hundreds, thousands, or a tenth, a hundredth, a thousandth, right? They invented all that. They invented the zero, for example. All these things, it's not some European concoction. But this is the part that bothers me, because we're sitting here talking about the language of, well, what does 2 mean? Well, what does 5 mean? What does 4 mean? We're missing the whole point. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is an objective fact that will always be true in this universe, and I can prove it to you this way. If I have a tomato and I have another tomato in the same hand, then in the other hand, there you go, Jordan, there's your plug, I have
Thanks, appreciate it.
I have another tomato with yet another sitting next to it. How many tomatoes do I have?
Is this a rhetorical question?
It's what you can answer. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say 4.
Okay. You don't even have to say that. I have a tomato, a tomato, a tomato, and a tomato. I don't even have to use the numerals, right? And this is my point I'm trying to make. I never said 2. I never said plus. I never said equals. I never said 4. Correct? But we all knew how many tomatoes I had in my hands. Why? Because the idea of 2 exists outside of the numeral 2. I mean, think about this. How in the world could we translate the number 2 between languages if they meant different things? The word dos in Spanish, zwei in German, those mean 2. It's the same concept that we've just used different words to describe, but it's the same concept, right? The idea of 2-ness,
right.
That if I have one thing and then I bring another of that thing there, I now have 2 of those things, is a universal constant. If I have something that cannot be subdivided, we'll go all the way down to the quantum level here, electrons. An electron cannot be broken down into anything smaller than itself. It is a point in space. Okay, this is some real physics level shit here. An electron can't be broken down any further, right? You can't have half an electron. It's not a thing. If I have an electron in one hand, an electron in the other, I have 2 electrons and always will until and even beyond the heat death of this universe. Because 2 doesn't exist as some social construct that we made. 2 is an emergent property of there being 1 and 1, or a thing and a thing of the same type together. That's all 2 is. Right? And that's why math works. Math is as many people have said throughout history, math is the language of the universe because these things are constant. Just because we slapped the symbol 2 and the number and call it the number 2 doesn't mean that the underlying concept isn't objectively true. And that's what bothers me about this. So,
if I may, I think it's so interesting, this whole critical theory, postmodern, we've moved past truth. Like, I feel like this is exactly where this sort of thing takes you. If you stop believing in absolute truths, if you have to question reality constantly, question, well, what is 2? What is an electron? Can we really, is everything a social construct? This is where you end up. It becomes less about trying to communicate reality as it is, and it becomes so self-reflecting. I would say navel gazing, but that's obviously a little more uncharitable. But we have reality to build on, and we focus on reality so much that we start questioning the foundation of reality that we're standing on, which is so weird, because if we didn't have that foundation of reality, we wouldn't be able to question it. And it reminds me of a joke. I went to college as an engineer, and there was a joke I heard once talking about at a high school dance. They lined up girls on one side of the gym, guys on the other side of the gym, and they said, you can, after every minute, you can close the gap to the center line by half. So all the kids who were in the higher up math classes just left at that point in the dance. They didn't bother sticking around because they knew that, according to the theory, you could never actually get close enough to the other person to dance. But everyone who was an engineer or was going to be an engineer stuck around because they knew once you get close enough, for all intents and purposes, you'll be able to dance just fine.
It's Zeno's paradox.
So there was a horrible joke told from an engineer's perspective.
As a computer scientist, not a computer engineer, engineering jokes are rough like that. my fiance is a computer engineer, and so we tease each other a lot about that. But yeah, it really is. I think the difference here is there are those people who wish to create things, to move forward, to learn new things, and then there are those that wish to destroy what's already been made. And I think the 2 + 2 = 5 proves this, because if you were attempting to say, here's a new way of doing math, why? Who cares? It almost always comes along with some idea of, well, here's what we could do with it. Here's how we could apply it. Or here's how it will be beneficial to us. This is simply beneficial because it's saying that the old way of doing things is somehow wrong or is not worthy. And that's not constructive. That's destructive. This whole theory is entirely about destroying the way things are built. And I don't think enough people realize this. And this isn't even something that's people haven't caught on to this yet. People still think, oh, this is just fringe. No, this is universities are training teachers with critical theory. And this is why I think it's starting to really rise to the top here. So
yeah, well, I mean, if you look at like who Lindsay's arguing with about this stuff, I mean, the main guy he's arguing with is I think it's a PhD student at Harvard. There's an article that Popular Mechanics put out, and Popular Mechanics is one of the biggest tech magazines out there. They're usually pretty, or at least in my experience, have usually been pretty good about fundamentally keeping in their lane. But they were defending the 2 + 2 = 5 stuff. And I mean, if that's the point we're at now, I don't know how you could say this is fringe.
It's not. It's entirely not. And anyone who says it is either disingenuous, doesn't actually understand the severity of the problem, or there's some agenda there. So give me a second. You shared that Popular Mechanics tweet again, just to prove this is not fake news. We're citing our sources here. Let me just go ahead and bring that up.
And while you're bringing that up, to be the most charitable I can, there is an argument I can see. You talked about people who create and people to destroy. There is definitely a need in society for those who can break down things that are outdated, irrelevant, and move forward. In a lot of ways, I feel like that's what the United States has been based on, is breaking down things that just haven't worked and trying to move forward and making people uncomfortable in good ways, progressing and ditching the bad and keeping the good. But when you have to start arguing 2 + 2 = 5, you can only break so much before the entire thing that has been built will just collapse, and then we'll just be staring at each other wondering what happened.
Right. I think the difference there is, if you are, let's say we're at the turn of the 20th century and we're trying to say, like you're Edwin Hubble, and Edwin Hubble, the Hubble telescope, the guy whose name is on the Hubble telescope, the reason he's famous in astrophysics is because he was the one who definitively proved that there were other galaxies in the universe. Before, they all thought that the Milky Way was the only galaxy, was basically the galaxy was the universe. But he proved that, I believe it was in Andromeda, or at least one of the other things that had to be so far away that they could not possibly be in our own galaxy. He proved that. Now, why is that important? Because what he did was he said, our previous paradigm is incorrect, right? We need to destroy the previous paradigm. But then introduced a new paradigm that was equally as constructive, if not more constructive, than the previous one. It allowed us to do better science. It allowed us to understand our universe better. Critical theory does not. Critical theory has zero construction to it. It's all destructive. The prescription isn't get rid of the old and replace with new that's better. It's simply just get rid of the old. There's no prescription on what to do once you're done destroying. It's just destroy. And I think that's where the difference is.
It lives in the realm of theory so much. I remember in a college class somebody talking about fusion energy and how great it was. And I was like, I mean, I agree. If we ever achieve that, that would be great. But you need to get beyond the theory and show that it works, show that it makes things better, not just talk about how life could be better if we're able to do this thing perfectly.
Yeah. So I have a bit of a gripe here. I'm gonna steer this in a little bit more silly direction before we get back to more serious stuff. I cringe so hard whenever I see someone share anything from that damn Facebook page. I fucking love science. I hate that Facebook page because it's like you want to talk about living in theory constantly. That's what it's all science fiction stuff. It's not actually science. It's people who watched Star Trek once and went, "Oh, that's so cool. I fucking love science." Right?
And that's science.
Yeah. Oh, like when people share the meme from Breaking Bad. Yeah, science, bitch. Like that's what's happening there. It's someone who has absolutely zero idea about what science is and then says, "Oh, but see, science, right?" For anyone who doesn't know this, maybe you do if you're watching, science is a process, and it's boring as all hell. Okay? Science says, here's what something's happening. We're going to try to figure out what's happening. Why is it happening? How is it happening? All these things. We answer all these questions, right? We come up with a theory. We test that theory, and we try to break that theory. That's the part that everyone forgets with science. We try to prove ourselves wrong. That's what science is, trying to prove yourself wrong, and eventually you'll get to something where that you can't prove it wrong. And then eventually you go, okay, well now this must be true because it cannot be proven wrong. We have actual evidence of this occurring, right? And eventually it will replace older paradigms. And people forget the whole you must try to prove yourself wrong constantly. Like everyone cites critical theory articles and papers, and never once do they ever go, well, maybe we're wrong. Because those people are shoved out immediately. That's not science. That is the antithesis of science. But again, science is a white male construction, which is funny because, no, the Greeks and the Persians and the Chinese and the Egyptians all did science to some degree. Now, they didn't call it science, but there was some degree of, well, let's question ourselves. Details. Yeah, none of them were white, but whatever. Anyway.
And I think it's... I've thought about doing a video, and maybe I will in the future, on divisive definitions, because it bugs me so bad when people are like, the science says this. I'm like, the science is not a monolith. Just like in all of our introductions, I feel like all of us kind of touched on, we don't like to put ourselves in labels as, oh, well, I'm 100% Republican, and I agree 100% with the Republican Party, because it's not a monolith, and that's just like science. There are things where lots of scientists agree on something, but there's always dissent, and hopefully you can put stock in what a lot of scientists say. But to say that science definitively says this, almost always there's people who are pushing back on that idea in different ways, and sometimes they have legitimate things to push back, and sometimes they don't. But yeah, I feel science.
So what
the example I always like to use is the science 70 years ago said lobotomies were great, amazing, perfect way to cure brain dysfunction. Mm-hmm. And I don't think people would agree with that today. And now that's a function of science changing and improving and whatever. But, people 70 years ago, in the same way that, people today could say, well, do you disagree with the science? Could have said the exact same thing back then, because that was the best idea. Who knows what we're wrong about now? But it just, I'm not a particularly religious person, but it does remind me when people talk, about religion as being replaced by wokeism. I think for certain subsection of people, religion is replaced by worship of science, and that well, the science says this. It's like God
Yeah.
says this, the science says this,
Right.
and I don't know. I mean, science it's a useful process for sure, but any process is only as good as the humans who do it. And if we're getting to the point where the humans who do it, are so into the theory that it has to fit the theory, then what good is science even? If the people who are doing the science can't even recognize their own biases or change their priors, then what good is their process?
So I think I was going to say something similar to you, and I think this is going to help build off of that. You were mentioning about people replacing religion with science. It effectively, there's a new religion that has come about, which is this unendingly faithful devotion to science. That's not entirely inaccurate, and in fact, if you check out James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and Peter Boghossian, they cover that. They do describe this in some ways as a religion, but not in the positive sense of most that we describe most religions with. It's more of a like I guess you could say like there are a lot of religions that we associate with positivity and discovering yourself and actually in exploring your spirituality in a way that's positive and constructive. But there
Looking
are
up, trying to be better, sort of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, James Lindsay describes it as upward-looking religions. We should aspire to be like God, for example, in a Christian context. And then there are downward-looking religions, which are all about punish the sinner. Those who are bad must be punished, right? Which is the bad way of that's a bad way of looking at it, and that's oversimplified. And he admits that, and I admit that as well. But that is certainly true in this case. That there's this sort of the decree has come down from on high that this is the way things are, and anyone who disagrees with that is a heretic. Now, this is important to understand because, like you said, Cicero, when Galileo was charged with heresy, all these people saying, but the experts say, would have convicted Galileo of heresy. Because all the experts back then said, the earth revolves around the sun. Copernicus, same thing. Copernicus was the only one in a sea of thousands of scientists that said, hang on a second, maybe the solar system is centered around the sun as opposed to the earth. I mean, that's another thing about science that I don't think people understand. The reason a technocracy like that isn't going to work is because you get stuck in these ruts where science for so long has thought something, and then something new comes along, and everyone just goes, oh, nope, that can't possibly be true. This is a conspiracy theory. You're a heretic, or something to that effect. And then, it takes a while before enough people go, wait a minute, this is probably actually true, and maybe we were wrong all along. What we thought was true is wrong. That's integral to science. And all these people who shout, I fucking love science, or listen to the experts, don't understand that the experts can be wrong, and they are wrong much more often than you'd like them to be. And that's okay. That is totally okay. That's the part of the scientific process.
And I just wish more people had that type of humility in the back of their mind that you can believe what you want to believe, you can think and have your opinions, but I feel like social media amplifies the people who don't have that sort of humility to think that maybe they might be wrong. It kind of amplifies the people who are so sure of themselves that everyone starts to see them as an expert, and then they can't be wrong. And I just wish we had more humility in complex discussions.
That is a good point.
Just to add on to what you said before, they're also the kind of people that would have convicted Socrates for corrupting the mind of the youth.
Oh, yeah. We're already seeing that. We're already seeing that. What about the children? That's constantly being trotted out as a reason to get people off of YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing he got convicted for was betraying the gods of the state, which is another thing that would have convicted him for, quite frankly.
betrayed the gods of the state. That's pretty good. So we are about not quite an hour into this, and there was one other major topic I definitely wanted to cover, and then we can kind of go into a sort of, potpourri round kind of thing. But for now, Jordan, you put out a video. Let me just go ahead and bring it up here.
The "Stop Forcing Me to Defend Trump" video?
Yes, yeah. Let me put a link to this in the chat, so anybody watching can go ahead and can take a look. It should be in the live chat, a link to it. Great video, by the way. Definitely check it out. Basically, I wanted to push back on a couple things that you said, because I think, and I think I've gone through the part of my political journey that you are on right now when you made this video. And like I've said before, as you do in every video, I'm going to disclose my biases. I currently believe I'm going to vote for Trump in November. So I would say I am a Trump supporter currently. And we can get into why later. But the thing I wanted to push back on is not necessarily any of your points. I agreed with the vast majority of your points, and I think your assessment was totally was very thoughtful and very, very well articulated. But I think there's some premises that occur that I think should be examined a little bit closer. So, for example, what I'm trying to mention, what I'm trying to get at specifically is the fundamental title of the video is "Stop Forcing Me to Defend Trump," right? And like you said in your video, you constantly are saying, "I don't like Trump, but," and the person in that that little sketch that you cut out was like, "I didn't even vote for Trump. I voted for Hillary," right? I think what this shows is there's some social pressure to even if you defend Trump, you still can't associate with him. Like, God forbid somebody thinks you're a Trump supporter. Right? And that's the part I think that bothers me the most, because I'm looking at this and I'm saying, well, hang on a second. The only reason why people are worried about that is because Trump supporters have been demonized. If it wasn't for people saying things like Trump supporters are racist, sexist, and homophobes, people wouldn't feel like they have to say, "I don't like Trump, but," and then go on to defend him anytime they needed to. They think he deserved being defended. And I think that's totally backwards. This is entirely wrong what we've done. We have just painted half of this country as being illegitimate in their views. We can't discuss these things. Excuse me. We can't discuss these things. These are totally off color. How dare you think like this? Because if you say these things publicly, you'll be ostracized. So I guess what I'm saying is, or at least I want to get your perspective on how do you feel about this whole stop. Why do I have to defend Trump? I don't like Trump, but I have to defend Trump. But is it?
Those are very good points to make.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm trying to. I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. I'm having a hard time articulating what I'm trying to say. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think there's a fundamental perception here that anyone that comes out as a Trump supporter is going to be ostracized, and in doing so, that's entirely wrong, because now it's impossible for anyone to legitimately support this guy. We've a priori assumed that.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And to be honest, there are definitely of the people who I interact with and I talk politics with, a vast majority are family members, and there are people who are far less informed about politics and don't follow it for fun. I'm kind of a masochist in that sense. I thoroughly enjoy seeing the political dramas that play out, but I sometimes I question, am I a worse person because of this? Like, because essentially I'm watching like a WWE of
Yeah.
politicians just slinging mud at each other. And so anyway, and it is definitely, it's a hard thing because there are people who I talk with who don't follow things nearly as closely as I do, and they just hear the things. Like I remember before, as I was getting into politics, I remember people talking about Trump and Charlottesville and saying, there were good people on both sides, implying that he was saying there were good white supremacists. And it was quite a while into, because I got into politics after that instance, where I heard and I realized, I went back and actually watched the clip. I'm like, oh, that's it was completely misrepresented, just like you were talking about. That people just associate everything with Trump as being the worst possible light. And so there is definitely that aspect there, because you can say something, and this is kind of what the whole divisive definitions series is about. Is you can say words, and there are like the literal definitions, like saying I support Trump because I like what he does as a politician, but there is all these connotations, like you said, that people think, oh, if you support Trump, then he's a racist, you're a racist, you support racist things. There are all these peripheral things that just get lumped together with that it's hard, because just like how languages evolves, how relationships evolve, like there's context in everything that's said. And it's really hard, because there are some things where I feel like I should and I want to back people like President Trump 100%, but I don't want people to see me as someone who is a racist. Like that's a perfectly valid thing. The one I would push back, though, because it's hard as a person to, especially because of how religious I am, I hold very high standards for other people. There are people who I endorse and I trust 100%, not necessarily in politics, but in general. And it's hard for me to endorse, honestly, almost any politician, because of my personal feelings on how I think people should act. And so it's hard to say that I definitely do support Trump, because almost every politician, I would say a similar thing. Like, I think they're in the right. Also, I don't think they're necessarily a great example or a great person. Anyway,
Yeah.
Does that make any sense? Did that actually address what you were saying, or did I just ramble for 10 minutes?
No, I think you've addressed that fairly well. I think you've made some good points, and you did point that out in your video, that you're saying, look, I'm not saying I'm a Trump supporter, but this isn't like this is new in politics. Politicians being unscrupulous and saying one thing and meaning another, and lying and stuff, like, this is not a new thing. Like, for example, go check out stuff about the American Civil War. We're talking 150 years ago. And back then, even, people were like, yeah, but so-and-so's a politician, and you know what that means. You can't trust him, yada, yada, right? Like that. This is a meme that goes back as long as there have been politics. As long as democracies have existed, where representatives, you elect people to fill positions, that has always been a thing. I mean, go back to read about it in ancient Greece. Same thing. People, like, this is not new. This is not like it's totally out of the blue. Politicians have always been the kind of people you have to be very careful about supporting. Now, I would say one of the reasons why I ended up supporting Trump was because I did more digging into what I assumed about this guy and what I assumed about what was happening, because like I said before, I have training in journalism. I've how do you write a news story? How do you make a news video? All these things, like how do you, like, I've done this stuff before. I'm not going to mention where exactly, but you'll have to take me at my word for that. And in doing so, it made me learn how easy journalism actually is. Like, actually writing a story is very easy to simply tell the facts. You just say who, what, when, where, why, how, right? It's so easy to put the truth out there. And that's why it bothers me so much when I see news stories and videos and commentators put out stuff that is obviously biased and putting out an entirely spun version of reality. Like, I don't watch him or care about him anymore, but the one thing that Bill O'Reilly did right that I agree with was the whole no spin zone thing. Whether or not he actually did, that's another story. But the idea of stop spinning reality. There are fundamental truths here that anyone can look at and see. This is what happened. You know, a bank robber tried to hold up a bank, right? Got shot by the police, let's say, for example. That's a news story. The headline would be something about, I don't know, man attempts to rob bank, police respond, fatally shooting him, something like that, right? That's a fairly innocuous headline. I literally just came up with it right that second, so it's not perfect, but it tells you exactly what happened, right? It's when you start seeing things like African American man shot by the police while he was robbing a bank. Why does that need to be there? Why does that matter? It doesn't matter. It changes nothing about the actual story, what actually happened. All it does is inject a political bent to it that doesn't belong. Only thing that should be there is tell me what happened. Don't tell me what I should think about it, or don't put things in there that will influence my emotions about it. Simply tell me the facts. Bottom line, what happened? Guy tried to rob a bank, got shot. Cop shot, right? And I think that is the fundamental basis here of why I support Trump, and it's because of how the media has failed us. Again, like I said before, 2016, we ended up having Hillary versus Trump, which I hated because I'm like, this is insanity. We've got this guy who's a billionaire reality TV show dude, went on WWE, like you were saying. It's actually WWE. And there's Clinton, who was totally cool with letting these people die in Benghazi, and she's got this email thing. She totally stored top secret shit on her personal email server, which is a big no-no, and anyone who has a security clearance other than her would have been arrested and thrown in jail, which has bothered me about that. So I'm like, we got a criminal and an asshole. Don't like either of them. But then I actually looked at what Trump was saying and compared it to the news reports about it. And I was like, wait a minute. He didn't say that. He didn't say that at all. What are you talking about? This is what he said. You know? And I'm like, you don't have to like the guy. He's an asshole. But don't make shit up. You don't have to make shit up. And it was the making shit up that got me to go, you know what? What else have they lied about this guy? And I dug into it more. You know, the good people on both sides thing. Like you said, entirely mischaracterized. And it was events like that, the Covington kids, where I was seeing how the media so easily could have done their job. There was a few minute long video that one person at this multinational corporation had to watch and say, hang on, are we doing this right? One person could have done that and would have saved them millions of dollars, because now Nick Sandman took him to the bank. And rightfully so, because they tried to destroy his life for political gain. And it's stuff like that that made me really go, you know what? What has he really done that I don't like? He's a bit abrasive. But you know what? We've had abrasive presidents before. Like that's not new. Johnson was super abrasive. He would really get in people's faces and cuss at them to their face to get him to do what he wanted him to do. They would call it the Johnson treatment. Look it up. It's actually pretty interesting. What other Teddy
also
Roosevelt?
showed them his dick.
Yes. Teddy Roosevelt? Do you think Teddy Roosevelt was a nice guy to other people? No. He was all about being a macho man and everything. He was like, speak softly, I carry a big stick. What is that big stick? The big stick is, I will kick your ass if you don't do what I say. Why do you think he spent so much money on the Navy? Right? He was an abrasive guy. What else was abrasive? Plenty of abrasive presidents out there who say crazy things. Right? But I sit there and I think about, who do I actually want as a president? Do I want someone who's going to sound nice, he's going to be very intellectual, very presidential is the phrase we hear. It's presidential. But when it comes to actually doing things, for lack of a better term, he's a pussy about it. I'm not gonna want to vote for that guy, because I don't care how you sound. What are you actually going to do? Trump, on the other hand, sounds like an asshole. Yes, but he's actually done things that I go, yeah, that's good. Lower taxes or cut like all these loopholes and stuff out of the tax code. Great. Love it. That's awesome. Do more of that, please. The border wall thing, talking about immigration. That legal immigrants, 100%. Just get into this country legally. That's all I care about. So the building a wall, that's okay. I'm right with that. Why this whole the Muslim ban thing, that was complete bullshit. It wasn't a Muslim ban. It was, these countries have terrorists, right? Why are we not banning people from Indonesia? The vast majority of people of which citizens of which are Muslim, because terrorists don't come from Indonesia. There are not many terrorists in Indonesia. You don't have to worry about it. Okay. So are these bad things? Not really. In my opinion, not really. So is this guy really that bad? Or do people not like him just because he's a bit of an asshole? And that's where I kind of was like, you know what? I'm all right with him being an asshole. I'm okay with it. It's fine. In fact, I'm all right with him being an asshole as long as he does what's good for the United States. That's what matters to me. So, I guess I'll get off my soapbox now.
All right. So
everybody else to respond. Sorry about that.
I just want to say, as the channel's resident not Trump supporter per se, I'm very much, we've talked about it a bit before. The one thing I love Trump for, and I'll give him a lot of credit for, is the way he's, very against the media and against their lies. And, I agree with you completely. They constantly lie about him. They constantly will say things that are untrue or phrase things in a way that's obviously not true. Like, if you look at the very good people on both sides incident, I think is probably the worst case in reference to Trump, where they basically just lie about the situation.
Yeah.
But with that said, I don't know if they lie about him, therefore I support him, is a thing that necessarily has to come together, I fully agree that they lie about him, they do all these things, but I still, with policy, I have a lot of questions, and I'm not a huge fan of the abrasive megalomaniac kind of personality personally.
Do you mind if I kind of clarify my stance a little bit?
Sure.
I'm not saying that I hate what the media's done, therefore I support Trump. It's, I hate what the media's done. I looked at what the media did, and then I went back and I reevaluated what I thought about him based on that new information. And I was like, I've been lied to about this man. I actually think what he's done is okay. It's not that big of a deal, right? We can discuss about whether or not we think these policies are good or not. That's a totally reasonable discussion, and we can disagree on those things. It's not, I hate the media, therefore I'm voting for Trump. It's, I hate what the media has done, and then I look into how he's been framed in the past, and I think a lot of what turns people off about Trump is just manufactured. So that's where, because before, I was like, but he's an asshole. I don't want to vote for an asshole. But then stuff with the media happened, Covington kids, good people on both sides, all this stuff that caused me to reevaluate my position on him. And coming out the other side, I was like, you know what? I'm okay with him being an asshole, and sometimes I think it's funny and I enjoy it. So to be clear on my position there.
Sure. Sorry, that might have been too uncharitable of an interpretation of what you said.
No, I
apologize for that.
I could have been unclear about that. That's fine.
So someone did ask something in the chat, which is, when did the media start getting racist. There's actually an interesting thing that's been going around about it's within the last decade that the usage of the word racist in the New York Times and the Washington Post, History, and all the big ones, it's gone up to like 300-400% just over the last decade. The usage of the word, and like they've never used it at such a rate as they have in the last 10 years. And so I think they know it's a useful accusation, and they know that no one wants to be called a racist. You know, that like it's once it became pretty much universally agreed that being a racist is bad, then it became a useful insult to fling at people, whether it's true or not. I mean, if you look into Trump's history, I think it's pretty hard to say that there's any real solid evidence that he's a racist. I mean, like if you look, there's no like a New York Democrat for 30 years of his life, and like if you look at all of his life's actions, I have a very hard time believing that he's personally a racist. But it is just a very useful, you know, along with sexist and homophobe and whatever, it's just a useful accusation to fling his way. But I mean, with that said, like, I think, you know, people now, I don't know if people used to as well, and that's something I want to look into a little more. But I think people now, it's very much the style of politics we have, and it's not just here, it is all over the world. But it's very much, you know, I'd like to grab a beer with that guy, or I could talk to that guy. And a lot of people don't really look at the policies. And even if they did look at the policies, you know, generally their view of the policy comes from party I agree with agrees with this policy, and not so much I agree with this policy. And I don't know, and maybe that's the way voting always has been when it's throughout the population. But I think that's what kind of has led us to this point of, you know, people just what wins is this guy's a racist or this guy's my guy or whatever it is.
Do you mind if I push back a little bit on the comment about I could sit down and have a beer with this guy?
Yeah, sure.
So I think there's a little bit more to that than just simply, well, I feel like I could like this guy's relatable. Because what does it mean to be relatable? It means you could have a discussion with that man, and you don't necessarily, or woman, whatever. It doesn't. You can have a discussion and disagree about things, and it's okay. And I think that's actually good, because that means you can sit, like if you could sit down and have a beer with this person, and you know, like you went at a bar and talk about things and go over politics, and you go, you know what, I don't agree with you there, but I could see why you feel that way. How is that not a healthy way of doing politics? Like that's how it should be. That, like, I'm totally cool with voting for a Democrat as long as they, you know, they check a couple boxes, that they as long as they aren't against a couple of these things or for a couple of these things that are like deal breakers for me. As long as I can sit down and have a discussion with them about it and politely disagree, and it's totally okay, I'm all right with living in that country. You know, I'm okay with having policies, the government have policies that I disagree with, as long as I am totally cool to voice those policies, voice my displeasure with those policies and stuff, you know? So you found that chart you were talking about. Let me go ahead and get that up on stream here. Jordan, do you have any pushback to any of these things we've been talking about?
Yeah, actually, I was on all of these things, both the journalism side and the politician side. I think it's fascinating to look at the incentive structures for everything, like you were talking about, that it's easy to do the journalism of reporting the who, what, where, when, but the incentive is there for you to get, especially now that, you know, the internet is so prolific, that the incentive structure isn't necessarily to get news correct, it's to get people to read your news. And same with politicians. They've always had the bad rap because it's I feel like it's very much Game of Thrones, like you stab people in the back and you stay on top as long as you can, and the incentives are there for you to betray anyone as long as it is advantageous for you. And I feel like that's what this graph up on the screen shows, is that especially since the internet took off, it's a lot more about garnering people's attention, and that is the true incentives behind media and behind news outlets, and far less about getting things right, because it all comes back to the business model getting funded and being able to do it for a living. And I wish I could say I knew that there was this magic pill that could fix media so that the incentive structure wasn't there to spin things, or that politicians weren't there to gain power, but I got nothing. So that's just my 2 cents. Is it's systems are set up and they are being used and abused to get those incentives.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think it's a fixable thing. Like, you'll get, the lefty types who say, just make it a national service. But I mean, the same thing happens with the BBC or whatever other national service. Or even in Germany, you'll know, like, the Der Spiegels of the world will do the same thing. It's not. The reason racism sells well in the US is because it's a hot social problem, whereas, in Europe, mostly in Europe, is where I'm going to reference. But in Europe, it's not as much of a problem, so it's not as much of a, or it's not as much a perceived problem. Actually, let's say it's not as much of a perceived problem, so it doesn't sell as well. It's basically, no matter who runs it or whatever their structure is, it's going to be based on what sells, because that's the system we live in, and that's the way it's always been. If you look at the graph, like in 1995-ish, the LA Times mentioned the word racism basically as much as they do today. And the LA Times ran an article this week about people being sad about going to Trader Joe's because they wouldn't change their Trader Jose's packaging, which, that's the borderline of what might even be considered racism, right? And so
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's based on what sells at a given time more than anything, and I think that's why we live in a time where racism will sell. I mean, I highly doubt anyone would disagree with that.
Yeah, I think you're both right in that this is about the incentive structure, what is going to sell us the most papers or get us the most clicks, I guess nowadays, and then what's going to give me the most votes, etc. I think the big irony of all this is, specifically to this discussion and this graph on the screen, is, wait a minute, why does racism and the idea that there are racists in this country sell? Because people are angry that that's the case. The only reason why the accusation of racism means anything is because we all know it's bad. That's why it matters. Yeah. And that's the big irony about all of this. You could easily argue, wait a minute, the only reason why racism, the accusations of racism sell is because we're all fed up with it. This is the least racist we've ever been. And that's the irony I don't think anybody on the left at least has at least grappled with or discussed, is maybe we're actually looking at this the wrong way, that there's this reaction to this because we think racism is bad. And actually, you could argue this is detrimental to the cause of reducing racism, because we're flinging the word around so much, we're inflating the word racism up so much that it's become meaningless. You've gotten to people now who they'll be called racist and they go, I don't care what you think about me. You can call me racist, I don't care. And that's like, well, did that actually stop the world from becoming racist? Did you actually do anything productive? I would argue you didn't. But yeah.
And
so
I think what's funny. I think what's funny is, like, if you compare today to like 1960 or 1950, is anyone really? I don't think anyone can seriously claim that today is more racist than it was in 1950. All right, then go back another 100 years. Was 1950 more racist than 1850? I think you'd also have a hard time arguing that.
Well,
so,
if you're arguing in good faith, yes. But I don't think there are a lot of people
right.
that are. There's a lot of critical theorists who would argue that it's always been the same amount of racism. It's just shown in different ways. Sure.
But it's in the same way that the media sells it. It's, that's their brand. If racism didn't exist, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but if racism didn't exist, then they wouldn't have anything to do. Right? Their job would be done.
That's a very Thomas Sowell way of looking at it. his
I mean,
idea
yeah, I do.
about government stuff, that the only reason that all these advocacy groups, like LGBT is the biggest example of this. Gay marriage was a hot topic in the United States for decades. And then in one Supreme Court decision, that all changed. And guess what? Decades of activism that started in the 80s ended in the early 2010s with the Supreme Court decision saying, there's nothing in the Constitution that says gay people can't get married, right? And you know what happened? The vast majority of this country went, okay, sounds good. Who cares? Not a big deal, right? And so could you really say that there's homophobia out there anymore? Again, the place where I came from, sure, there were a couple people that were like, I mean, I don't think you should be getting married if you're Christian and you're gay. Like, that doesn't jive with the Bible. But then when you said, okay, but what about the Constitution? The vast majority of the time they'd be like, well, yeah, I mean, if you're talking about if it's a non-religious marriage, for example, they were totally cool with it because it didn't go against the Bible. So again, the point being, it's not that they're homophobic. They're saying, but these rules that you supposedly are abiding by say you can't do that. So even in rural America, most people were like, whatever, I don't care. As long as you pay your taxes and are a good citizen, who cares who you get married to? If it's a consenting adult, who cares? So I think a lot of what's been missed here. Excuse me, I gotta hold on a second. I gotta mute myself here.
Well, so to jump on what's in the chat a little bit, the word fascist, pretty similar to racist, but that's definitely more in the political realm than anything. Like the word racist, if you talk to your average person on the street, like the average person on the street could have a lot to tell you about racism and why it's bad. I don't think the average person on the street, to the same extent, could tell you the same about fascism outside of, maybe Hitler was a fascist or people I don't like are fascist or whatever. But I feel like maybe it will, but for now it's not the same point as racism as far as the average person's use. I don't know if you guys feel the same way.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Well,
I had some issues here with the dog. Go ahead, Alex. You were gonna say something?
Well, just on the point of fascism, fascism is another word that's coming into play, kind of like racism is we're starting to see it being used more often, most often in like areas where it doesn't even make sense. The biggest thing is like Antifa. So there's a lot of progressives who support Antifa, and they say, well, if you don't support Antifa, you must be a fascist because Antifa is literally anti-fascist. So you are seeing fascism used kind of thrown around a lot too.
And I think, Cicero, you were trying to make the point that there is a bit of a difference between fascism and racism, in that racism is a lot more. Like fascism is this ethereal concept of governance, right? Whereas racism is something that's easily tangible. You can see it happen, and you know it when you see it. Like when somebody calls someone the N-word, that's racism, right? It's easy to see that. It's a lot harder to see fascism because and also especially when it doesn't actually occur, like when it's not actually in the process of acting, it's very difficult to think about fascism because it is this very nebulous idea,
Yeah, and I think it's particularly interesting because people calling other people fascists, and it's like I get that they're talking about that they have fascist tendencies, but I agree with you, Cicero, a lot. Like it's a lot. It's used a lot, and I don't think people really sit down and think about what it is or why they're using it or if it actually applies.
Well, even like theorists have trouble categorizing what fascism is, because I mean, if you look at Mussolini versus Hitler, both of whom, I mean, those are probably the two most prominent fascist leaders in history, maybe Franco. But if you look at those two, like, they had some things in common, but a lot of the ways they led were different. And so even the definition of the word fascism, if you Google it now, you'll see, I think, they've added far right to it, but it never even used to be categorized that way, and I don't think it really should, because it's not. I don't think it's definable in that way because it's kind of a fungible thing. It almost it revolves around the state, but like outside of revolving around the state and maybe a cult of personality, like it's not. There's so much that goes into it, but everyone knows it's bad. So then it becomes easy to just say, you have fascist tendencies, or you're a fascist, or
There's a
fascism is bad, returning to a fascist state kind of thing.
there's a I don't know if y'all ever watched the show Frasier. You ever watch that?
Nah.
It's a great show. You should definitely watch it. I love it. It's pretty funny. I especially like the father. So like Frasier's a psychologist that has a radio show in Seattle, right? And there's and his brother's is also a psychologist or psychiatrist or something like that. And but their dad is like a cop, a retired cop that he's retired because he got shot on the job. And so he's like this real down-to-earth guy that's like, I just want to have a beer and play some cards and watch TV, whereas these two are real highbrow, listening to classical music and going to the opera and things. And it's a great dynamic to show the difference between the upper crust of society versus the everyday Joe. It's done in a very good way that doesn't shove politics in your face or anything, in the way that most '90s shows didn't. But one of the episodes has something to do with there is an election in town, and they're worried about this one guy. I forget the exact thing about it, but basically they were talking about him. The brother was talking about so and so's running for mayor or governor or something, and Frasier's like, oh, that fascist, and it was just so funny to me because it was like this was like 1994 or 5, that it was so long ago. And it was so different from nowadays. It was so innocent, in a way. And that really got me. That it probably wouldn't have gotten me if I watched it back then. But I think the thing about fascism that is interesting is I don't agree necessarily that it's difficult to understand what fascism is. You just need to understand the historical context that fascism grew up in. So fascism, despite what many on the left will argue with about, fascism grew out of socialism. It is a socialist doctrine. And the reason it's socialist isn't... It was socialist not because it said seize the means of production. It was socialist because it said collectivism over individualism, which was what the vast majority of socialists felt like. That's the way they believed the society should be run. That's how it was into like the 1850s, it fundamentally cites Marx, Engels, and all these socialist thinkers, and it actually was French and Italian socialists who birthed fascism, right? So that's why there's always so many similarities, and everybody's like, oh, horseshoe theory. Horseshoe theory doesn't make any sense, because it uses the archaic paradigm of left versus right, and it puts fascism on the right and socialism on the left when they really are. They don't belong there. Like they're very. Socialism and fascism should have broken the right-left paradigm, and it didn't for some reason. So, but regardless, like Cicero, you were saying, Mussolini and Hitler are the two most prominent fascists probably in history, but they don't. They did a lot of things differently. Like, for example, fascism, as written down by Mussolini and all these philosophers in Italy and France, had nothing to do with race. Absolutely nothing to do with race. It had everything to do with the nation and the state. The nation being the citizens of the state. And it's basically to boil down fascism is everything within the state, nothing outside of the state. And the state is to be trusted with the welfare of the nation. So that's why Mussolini was like, the newspapers can print whatever they want as long as we approve of it, because the state are the people that say this is what's good for the country, right? And so we don't want anyone to do anything that's not good for the country, right? And that's, if you think about it in that sense, there are a lot of people nowadays who are like that say I'm only good with this, that like the no bad targets, only bad, or no bad tactics, only bad targets, is the same argument that Mussolini was putting forward about the newspapers, because they're saying, look, you can, as long you can say whatever you want, but if you don't agree with me, I'm going to come after you. But if you agree with me, then we're cool with it. Like that's where I think a lot of people don't understand where fascism also comes in. We attach the racism aspect to it because of the Nazi Party, which I would argue is a very German phenomenon. It wasn't true of most fascist, most things about fascism. You know, like Spain. When sister, you mentioned Franco. Franco didn't care what race everyone was. He only cared about, are you for Spain or not? If you're a communist, you're up against the wall. Like, that's all he cared about. That's what it was. And I'm not sitting here saying these are good things. I'm saying these are bad things. But you have to understand that they weren't doing this because they were racist. They were doing it because they thought that those that opposed them were trying to destroy their country and were willing to do anything to use the state to crush them and to crush anyone that would ever possibly disagree with them. So I think that's, I don't know that's necessarily a difficult concept. It's just, it's so politically charged that it's gone off the rails kind of.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, not loving labels, because if you try and group all of fascism nicely and neatly into this one umbrella that everybody has to check all these boxes, it doesn't work. So you still need the word and you still apply it to the ones it fits, but it's difficult to group them all together and say, oh, they all had everything in common. It's just some of the things that they had in common that we just kind of group them together, and it's hard to nail down which things are central to, in this example, fascism, and which things were, region specific, like you were talking.
Right. I think that's where where Mussolini was talking about this, everything within the state, nothing outside of the state kind of thing. I think that's the closest we can get to a universal definition of fascism that we can get. Anything beyond that, you start to say, okay, well, Franco didn't do that, or Italy didn't do that, or Germany didn't do that, And so I do want to push back just a bit on the Arcade Productions. Says Nazis were Socialist Workers' Party, Workers of the World Unite. Yes, they were the National Socialist German Workers' Party. They weren't Workers of the World Unite. They were Workers of Germany Unite, which is a difference, and that's an important difference between National Socialism and communism. Effectively,
right, and I think I was going to say, I think the reason that a lot of socialists have effectively convinced people that fascism is so far away is that, like, the Nazis hated the international socialists. They thought it was only within, Germany, where, most traditional socialism is the international variety.
Yeah. And so there's, and this is interesting. So there's a couple different reasons for this that I think, like there's a couple things colliding here historically that have caused this to happen. And I think it's fascinating because the German flavor of fascism was National Socialism, which is not the same as just fascism, because, like you're saying, it was National Socialism, not International Socialism, which is communism. But the reason why the Germans said it should be National Socialism is because most of them thought they were the master race, the superior race, right? And specifically, they were like, Jews are Untermensch and all this bullshit, right? So that's where you get the German flavor of it, which had this racial component, which had this superiority complex about it that you don't find in other versions of fascism, like Italian fascism, which was like, yes, the workers of Italy unite. But why Italy? Because Italy has this history and everything, but it had nothing to do with race. I mean, there was a little bit of arguing about, well, Italians should live in Italy, but they were also cool with like Slavs living in Italy. They didn't care. They just wanted to be the Roman Empire again. So it's there wasn't why just workers in Italy, because there was still sentiment about Italy was a very young country. It had only been around since the 1860s, so everyone, like, the concept of being Italian was very new, and people were still clinging to this idea, this nationalist idea. So when the socialist part of it came along, it wasn't because of race that they thought they were better. It was because they're like, well, why workers of Italy unite? Because I don't give a damn about workers in Romania. I care about workers in Italy because we're Italy. That was where the difference came in, and that's also, you're talking about throwing wrenches into definitions that cause the original definition to get fuzzy. That really does that as well. Yeah, General 77 says Mussolini had even described race as, quote, just a feeling. That's racist. That racist. Yeah, he. I don't know that you could argue Mussolini was necessarily racist. I mean, at least from what I've read, maybe he did say things that were racist. It's certainly possible that was a common feeling at the time, but I don't know that you could characterize Italian fascism as racist. You could call it authoritarian and totalitarian, but I don't know that you could call it racist.
Well, I guess it's the difference between the traditional definition of racism, which is our race is superior to theirs, and the more modern systemic definition, which we can get into a little bit maybe.
Oh man!
Right. Where.
Well, actually, you could argue that definition means there are no racists. Because here, let me find it. Hang on.
Yeah, I'm really curious where you're going with this.
Hang on. I see. I went to find the actual definition. What was it? Merriam-Webster just changed it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, to include it. Okay,
yeah,
so
like some 21-year-old complained, which is hilarious, by the way.
So.
And I think this is. Oh, go for it.
No, go ahead, because I got to look for it.
I was just gonna say that this is going back to the whole divisive definitions. Why I was inspired originally to talk about definitions and his example in racism. I think it was The Amazing Lucas. At one point in time, he did a video talking about people changing definitions, and he was talking about how it seems like it's very easy to, like we were talking about earlier, that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5. Like that's very obvious, but when language evolves very quickly and definitions change out from underneath you used to be able to say, oh well, the dictionary definition of this word is, but it's very interesting that language is changing so rapidly that the traditional 2 + 2 = 4 starts to look crazy when definitions of what 2 is and what plus is and what equals is change. Then the people who are claiming 2 + 2 = 4 actually start to look like the crazies, because you go look up the definitions and you're like, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. And it's interesting how different people try to define their terms so it fits their worldview.
So that is interesting, and I think a lot of what this channel is trying to do is cover that. Like, I try to go at things from what I would describe as the other perspective. So I found the Merriam-Webster definition of racism, right? So follow with me here. The first line is basically what we would all agree on as a good definition of racism: that a belief that race is primary determinant of human traits and capacities. The racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race, for example. That's not a poor definition. I don't think it's necessarily the best one. I think actually the last one there, 3, is probably the best one. Racial prejudice or discrimination is probably the best one on a day-to-day level, at least. But the second one is interesting because it can mean, supposedly, according to Merriam-Webster, a doctrine or political program based on the assumption of racism and designed to execute its principles. That's a recursive definition, by the way. That's bad. You can't do that.
No. I hear recursive definitions unintentionally work great in computer science and computer engineering.
No. Oh my God. No. You want an infinite loop? That's how you get an infinite loop. Why isn't this stopping? It just stopped. It just froze. Yeah, because you're in an infinite loop because you defined racism using the word racism.
Where did all my RAM go?
Yeah. and then a political or social system founded on racism, which is bizarre. Like, what is racism? The United States. That's according to this definition, and according to critical theorists, they would say that's true. Now, let's look at just the second definition, because I think this is interesting. If a political system that's founded on racism is racism, a doctrine or political program based on the assumption of racism and designed to execute its principles is racism, then can any one person really be racist? Because it's just the structures around them. It's only the system. It's not the individual people. It's not the person that said the N-word to that black guy. It was the system that allowed him to say the N-word to that guy.
Yeah, you're right. So that means that everyone is just a victim of this vicious system. There's actually no personal racists.
If anything, you could say the KKK aren't racist because they simply grew up in a racist society and in a racist system that taught them to be racist, right? Which means you could do some
KKK are just victims.
You could do some conversion therapy on them and make them not racist. Right? I mean, so what do y'all think about that?
I think I'm kind of losing my mind. This is every time I think about the critical theory stuff, it just
I love it, honestly, because it's like little puzzles. It really is. They're like these concepts are like little puzzles because there was I forget what's her name on Twitter. It's like Holly someone who follows James Lindsay on Twitter. I found her on Twitter because she replied to a bunch of stuff. She started this thread. After I tell this, I'm gonna tell a story. I'm gonna try to find her and put her out. You should definitely follow her on Twitter. She's a good follow. Basically, she started a thread where she's like, just reply to this tweet with anything. Just put some words down, and I will argue about how it's wrong and under critical theory. And she did. It was great. Let me try to find this tweet. Y'all go ahead and talk amongst yourselves while I go ahead and do that.
I think this is the crazy part about this very theoretical critical theory is that you literally can spend all day arguing about these things, and it's recursive. It gets us nowhere, and it just as somebody who is biased as an engineer, I like when things work. I like functionality. I like and I know that's part of my bias, and sometimes I have to be prompted by other people like you're kind of harsh on that. It doesn't have to do exactly what you want it to be okay. I'm like, no, it needs to work, but man, this stuff is in such left field. I don't know what to do with it.
Well, what I think is interesting and what I've kind of come to the conclusion of with the critical theory people, I just don't think they're actually interested in the debate or the idea thing. I think it's just a power thing. It's, if you can argue something so absurd and have people accept it, that means you have power. Effectively, that means you have the power to decide this is true, this is not. And I think that's the game more than anything. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think they're it's about the control of the institutions, and it's about the control of the legal system more than it is getting to the truth.
Just real quick, I put it's at Holly Math Nerd. It's in the chat. Definitely check her out. She's a bit left leaning for my political tastes, but her critiques of critical theory are 100% on point. So definitely follow her, check her out. She's one of the more left-wing people that I follow, I think is it's definitely good to see what she has to say. She's a fairly small. Oh no, she's blown up recently. When I started following her, she only had like a couple dozen followers. But yeah, check her out. She's really good. Sorry, you were saying?
As I was just gonna say, I also wonder how much of the critical theory crowd start to believe it. Like part of me thinks that it was all started as a thought experiment, but then because it became popular, people just started to believe that because it was popular, because they were drawing people in, that it must be true. I wonder how many people honestly believe it, or how many people just say, well, definitely people think it, so there's got to be something there. Like I wonder how many people have convinced themselves that it makes sense.
Well, like Lindsay's pointed out that it's it's very cult-like, and when you're in a cult, most people who are really truly indoctrinated in a cult, they really believe what they're saying. So I would bet a good chunk of them really believe what they're saying. The problem is it's so against objective reality, really.
So I think if you also listen to a lot of what like James and Helen and Peter have to say about all this, I think it really does come out that this isn't some accident. This is intentional. This is how deconstruction works. All these theories are based on the concept of deconstruction, and so you don't like there were people at the beginning that were saying, there's all these power dynamics and everything that cause some people to be oppressed and those to be oppressors, etc. And they're arguing for these points, that these outcomes, but they're not arguing for them from the perspective of we're trying to level the playing field. They're arguing from the perspective of no, we're right, we should be the oppressors. And I think that's a key here that everyone misses. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can go ahead and dig yourself. They admit this. Critical theorists, people who actually come up with this stuff, admit that the whole thing is about getting those who are oppressed to become the oppressors, to flip the power dynamic. That's explicit in their goals, to flip the power dynamics. So I think a lot of people who tangentially kind of see some of the stuff and maybe don't read a lot of the theory of it, don't catch that. They just think, oh, anti-racism, that sounds good, right? I want to be anti-racist. But it's not, because it's about being anti-racist is just being anti-white in this day and age. So I think the problem is there is a certain core group of people who are producing this stuff who do have nefarious ideas in mind, and then there are the quote useful idiots that just either for lack of time, don't care, whatever reason, they follow along with it because it sounds nice, because those who have these nefarious purposes specifically defined these things. Like they changed the definition of racism because you can now use a Mott and Bailey argument to say that to get people to do what you want them to do in regards to racism, and then when people accuse you of saying that's not what racism is, you go, well, we're just trying to get, or that's not what you should do, then you can fall back to, but racism is bad, right? And then all of a sudden you're screwed. So I think there's a lot of nefarious purposes here that I think we would be naive to say don't exist. We got a bunch of debate here in the comments. General 77 says, I heard someone in the 2+2 debate say that 2 is a variable. That's fucking hilarious. That's not, yeah, okay. That's not how that works. 2 is a constant. RK Productions says
it's a constant variable.
Yeah, they're pulling a Bill Nye with the number 2. 2 just used to be 2. Now 2 is really a spectrum, and 2 doesn't always have to equal 2. That's pretty good. Oh man, that is very good.
It's like I said at the beginning. The issue is that technically, somewhere in the world, 2 can be a variable, But that's
No,
not the way
no,
that
no,
it's
no.
used 99.99%
No.
of the time.
No,
And it's just completely waste of time to even pretend.
dude. Here's the thing. That's not even true. It's not true. 2 is never a variable. 2 is always 2. If you want to say 2.5, say 2.5. There's a reason why you have, like, if you have to sit there and say, I'm going to say 2 is actually 2.5, 2 plus 2 equals 5, why the fuck didn't you just say 2.5 plus 2.5 equals 5? Why? Because you're being a disingenuous hack who has nefarious purposes. This is the same thing. Like, this is a complete allegory for this whole racism thing. The definition of racism. They just changed the definition and are now using it, shoving it down people's throats for political gain. That's what it is. And the worst part is they're doing it and saying they're doing it for political gain, and people are still saying, no, this is just, don't think that. That's just a right-wing conspiracy. No, they're saying it themselves. General 77 says x is a variable in f of x equals x squared because x can be a range of numbers. It doesn't work the same for 2. Correct. 2 is 2. The quantity 2. Think something having 2-ness to it is 2. God, man. Like
Well, Shandy, you know, it pains me to hear that you don't think that it's possible for 2 to be on a spectrum and not be 2. So I'm just going to have to call you a bigot. You are an absolute bigot.
I am a math bigot.
Right-wing conspiracy theorist. How dare you, sir?
Cancel the Shandy.
That's right. The Shandy, confirmed right-wing hack.
Yep. The Shandy is confirmed. Right-wing hack.
This is
E-list.
Great stuff. But I love this 2 plus 2 equals 5 thing because it's so... I love also there are just these few mathematicians out there that are so desperate to jump on board with that. And I'm just like, okay, no one should ever accept a paper from these people ever again. Not because of cancel culture, but simply because obviously this person doesn't understand math. You need to go back to the beginning and learn what constants are and variables and what we mean by things when we talk about math, to stop saying 2 is actually 2.5. Because then you could just say, why didn't you just say 2.5? It's so simple.
But you see, constants are colonialized. It is...
yeah, that's colonialism.
Whiteness.
That's right. That's imperialistic whiteness, constants are. General 77 says, reality can be whatever I want it to be. Some progressive hero, probably. No, see, no. The progressive hero would say is reality is a social construct, and is the result of white European imperialism, capitalist imperialism, and that's why we need to deconstruct math in order to usher in the communist utopia.
I think, therefore, I am a social construct.
Yeah. Eat that, Rousseau.
Well, I think it's...
I have a question for...
Descartes, I'm sorry. Go
ahead.
Go ahead, Alex. Ask your question, and then we'll go with Cicero.
Okay, awesome. I just wanted to ask General if he's still on. What is Hannah and Jake? Is that like a Kyle Kalinske type show where it's just nonsense? Or I don't think I've ever heard of that. Hannah and Jake, like a political show.
I think it's a podcast or something, or it was a YouTube channel or something. It's like Hannah and Jake, but then didn't like Hannah leave or something? I never watched them, but. White people created reality, so they're gods. That's hilarious.
Used to be Hugo and Jake.
Wait, so is it... yeah, see, I hear about all these things. I actually don't follow these people, so I'm not sure. Like, I've heard these names before, but I've never actually watched any of their content, so I apologize because I'm not able to comment on this effectively. But this is interesting. The white people created reality, so they're gods. Have you watched that new video that's been going around on Facebook where it's the woke person and the racist person are like getting along? Because that's a great video. That video is hilarious. Definitely check that out. What was it? Let me find the link for it.
So I was going to say on the Lindsay thing, he retweeted something today that I thought, I think is a great encapsulation of the situation. It was some I think is an epidemiologist. I don't remember what she is exactly, but here's how she defined James Lindsay: a large account run by a right-wing extremist who doesn't believe that black people belong in STEM. Saw a well-reasoned and interesting mathematical tweet about 2 plus 2 by Kareem Carr. He's one of the people who was trying to say 2 plus 2 equals 5, and decided it was the perfect opportunity to promote that racism to his audience.
That's incredible.
But they can just state it. Here's the thing.
Right.
They can just come out there and just say this stuff. And they can say it. No one's pushing back outside of people who, quote unquote, themselves are already racist.
Yeah.
I remember all growing up through like elementary, and then you got into junior high and high school, and you started doing research papers, and people like, don't trust Wikipedia. Anybody can write anything in Wikipedia. And then you realize, oh, anything can write anywhere on social media or the news. Anybody can do. I'm like, what?
Exactly. So I found it, by the way. I'll put the link in the chat here, this video. If you haven't seen it, definitely check this out. This is hilarious.
Oh, I died laughing.
It was
great.
It's very good. And here, I'm going to put I just took a screenshot of it. I'm going to put it in the background here. Give me a second. It's let's go through. I want to go through this tweet thread that you posted here, that you're talking about here, Cicero. I definitely want to touch on this. Give me just a moment. I got to put this up.
And not to be a killjoy, but I should probably go in the near future. Dinner is calling.
That sounds good. Let's we'll go over this. We'll read this tweet thread, and then we'll call it a night. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right. And so it's Brad and Chad, best friends forever.
Great.
It's hilarious. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, definitely check that out. But so we're on this thread here. I'm gonna put this in the chat as well. We'll cover this tweet thread, and then I'll go through the chat and then just answer any questions anybody has, and then we'll call it a night. So, Ellie Murray on Twitter, says that she started it off. She actually that tweet you mentioned was the second one in a thread. She initially started off replying to a. Darren L. Dolly. Hang on. This is great.
It's a medium.
This is hilarious because he says that this person says George Orwell was not a mathematician. When he wrote about 2 plus 2 equals 5 in his novel 1984, he used this equation to satirize the potential of authoritarian power to force people to repeat and thereby believe something that goes against established knowledge. In this fictional process, authoritarian power does not tolerate any questions of resistance and tries to coerce its subjects into repeating and believing something that itself knows very well to be untrue. Through imagining this particular act of coercion, Orwell considered how sheer force can distort and curtail public knowledge. When mathematicians write on Twitter about possible conditions under which 2 plus 2 could be said to equal 5, there is not any such coercion nor any withholding of what these writers think is untrue, or what these writers think is true. Rather, they use the phrase 2 plus 2 equals 5 to playfully demonstrate that mathematical operations can look differently depending on their axioms and cultural contexts. No, cultural context is irrelevant. Tribes in Africa understand 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Cultural context and math.
This is such a white man's burden thing. Like, how racist is it? How racist do you have to be to say, yeah, people from Africa just don't understand 2 plus 2 equals 4? What the fuck? That's so out there. Like, how could you even believe that?
I love there's no coercion from the letter that a bunch of center left people signed saying the cancel culture wasn't a thing and they all got canceled. It's like, oh, that's a solid proven point there.
Right. I still love this opening sentence. But you see, George Orwell was not a mathematician. He wasn't a smart guy TM like I am. Such bullshit. Anyway, so she replies. Well, sorry, go ahead.
You keep going.
So she says, she replies this and says, I'm angry and I need to say something. This article is a nicely written explainer of the 2+2 discourse of late, but it's also completely misleading. It's wrong to talk about this without acknowledging that the entire reason this topic blew up is racism. The discussion about 2+2 = 5 is racist. And that's where she says...
Well, what does it say in the comments there? Let's just get down to it. This is what RK said. Let's just get down to it. If you believe 2+2 = 4, you are a white supremacist.
Apparently. Just here's your KKK hood, and we'll see you at the next meeting.
Yep.
She says a large, Cicero, you read this before, talking about how this right-wing extremist says black people don't belong in STEM. Never said that, by the way. Just put it out there. Just tweeted it, and like you said, Jordan, it's like Wikipedia. Just anyone can say whatever they want. And she continues. She says, as a result, this person that Lindsay was arguing with has been bombarded by racist and hateful trolls for days and has responded by generously explaining more clearly the mathematical concepts behind this idea. Entirely bullshit, by the way. His mathematical arguments are entirely wrong because they're not mathematical. They're like, oh, but the culture around mathematics. Okay, so not math. She continues, he's been the main voice of reason on this topic, and yet I see a lot of you supporting the math without supporting him, even when reiterating his mathematical arguments. This is great. This is great because she's basically shitting on everyone who agrees with this guy saying 2+2 = 5, but somehow trying to say that they're racist because they're not using his name or something like that. Was this Kareem Carr is this PhD student from Harvard or whatever, right? Kareem has been the voice of reason on this topic, and yet I see a lot of you supporting the math without supporting him. Even when reiterating his mathematical arguments, many people aren't mentioning Kareem or the hate and racism he has been dealing with. This is a white woman, by the way.
Oh, get out of here.
This is a white woman, by the way, sticking up for... She's white knighting for black people. Because that's the responsibility of white people. The white man's burden is to stand up for black people. To write about this discourse, naming the extremist account owner, but not Kareem, is to support the goal of excluding black people from science, and yet many of you are doing it. Do better. So hang on a second. So I'm going to go shit on a supposed alt-right troll that doesn't believe black people should be in STEM. But because I didn't mention the guy's name, who's a prominent person standing up against him, you're supporting white supremacy still.
You just can't win. You can't win.
She continues. She says, and since we're on the topic, Twitter don't think I haven't noticed how few black men in academia are verified. It's a problem. You need to fix it. Start with Kareem Carr. How about it?
It's gone rampant. Now Twitter's on blast.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
Yeah.
How can you you're so self-defeating. It's just like, all right, guys, we're all solidarity. Oh, but fuck you because you didn't say this guy's name. That was amazing.
I hate to say it. I don't really hate to say it. Left has just gone off a cliff lately. That's all I can say about it.
It's just it's incredible.
There's no way you can explain this.
I mean, yes, I can. It's critical theory. This is totally just critical theory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah.
This is.
He got you there.
You can't explain this logically. You can't use logic to explain
okay,
this.
yeah. Logically, keyword, I guess.
All right. So that was a great thread. I very much enjoyed that. Ellie Murray at EpiEllie. Definitely check her out and laugh at that.
Yeah, so I think she is actually an epidemiologist, which makes this even funnier.
Yeah, this is hilarious.
I'm sure she was one who said that, the protesters don't contribute to any rise in coronavirus.
No, you're misstating the argument. They actually cause it to lower because so many people are afraid that they stay home. That was the reasoning.
Because they're peaceful. People hear the peacefulness and they stay home.
God.
Yes, exactly.
She's an epidemiology assistant professor at a university. Great.
Yes.
Wonder what she's teaching her students. Oh, tell everybody you can go out and you can say Black Lives Matter and protest with wearing a mask. It's fine, but don't get together with your family because you're going to spread the coronavirus. That's probably what she tells her students.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty. You know, I if you think about it, we should just all have everybody go back to school, and just make sure that every class has a sign above the teacher that says Black Lives Matter, and then we'll be fine.
Yeah,
there will be
we can treat it as a protest.
Why haven't we thought of this before?
Because it's simple. Schools are white supremacy.
Exactly, that's right. Which means teachers are white supremacists. They're tools of white supremacy.
Oh
Checkmate,
my gosh, teachers.
Checkmate, atheists. Oh wait, hang on a second. So Cicero here has informed me that apparently Kareem has replied to this thread. To
great.
accept Kareem Carr has graciously accepted Ellie Murray getting on her knee and praising the white man as the black man as the white woman should, right? It's her duty.
Yes.
The burden of the white person is to bend the knee, and the white man's burden is to make sure that they profess their love for all people of color. And Kareem Carr says, "Thank you for the support, Ellie. I do feel that the brutal, ongoing racist attacks that I and other academics from minoritized groups," I haven't heard that one before. That's interesting.
Nope.
Faced has been underreported. I'm sorry that your comments are now filled with the same trolls that have been attacking me.
Get fucked, Kareem.
Kareem.
Unreal.
Oh, man. While I appreciate that many people were participating in the debate, the trauma of the attacks and the emotional labor of defending the science was not equally shared.
Oh my gosh.
He got ratioed on this, thankfully.
What do you have PTSD now, Kareem? Is that it?
I love the concept of emotional labor, by the way. I think I have one idea in the pipeline for another video that I'm going to do, but I do want to do one on the concept of emotional labor, as if no one has like it. Emotional labor is great because it also shows how communism has thrust itself in here. The concept of labor in emotion, like that's so blatantly Marxist. But anyway, let's go ahead and read some of these chats, and we can get going.
Okay.
So General 77 has done a bunch of stuff here. Actually, you know what? Let's go back a little bit further to cover this to make sure we're good to go. RK Productions says Hugo and Hannah and Jake used to be Hugo and Jake. And then Hugo outed as a trans quasi-fluid triceratops, so now it goes by Hannah. General 77, as stated earlier, says 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a white concept because apparently non-white people were too stupid to figure out basic arithmetic. Yeah, it's totally... it's incredible, if you actually sit and think about it, how racist it is to say that other cultures just don't say 2 plus 2 equals 4. What? What are you talking about? Other races can count, like what is this? What is this bullshit? And then of course if you think 2 plus 2 equals 4, you're a white supremacist, says RK. General 77 says that those two guys, Brad and Chad, should have just switched shirts at the end. The words are socially constructed, but the relationship between 2 itself and 4 isn't. Exactly. If you, I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but basically I made the argument that the words, and the terminology we use to describe to the concept of addition and 4 and equality the words are socially constructed, but they're only socially constructed to attempt to describe the objective reality living behind it. Right? Like there is no case where having a tomato in one hand and a tomato in another hand doesn't result in me having a tomato and a tomato. Right? You don't even need to use the words 2 and 4 and plus and equals to show that relationship has to be true. So the idea that there's only words is insane. Let's see here. General 77 says, "Damn, I'm a non-white white supremacist. Apparently, because of this thing, 2 plus 2 equals 4." He says, because an argument is true no matter the tint of the person who says it. And well, logic is racist. Yes, it is racist because it's a capitalist, imperialist, white supremacy, something, the usual. Protests of peace, that's correct. I loved the truck of peace meme when there would be like terrorist attacks in Europe, and everybody was like really afraid to say, well, it was a jihadist that did it, right? Which is ridiculous because it's this person was regardless of your opinion on whether or not the vast majority of Muslims are peaceful, this person was preaching Islam as the reason for them driving over people with a truck. So the truck of peace thing, I love that meme. That was a funny meme. He continues, General 77. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I just loved similarly. There was an article in the Babylon Bee that talked about the peaceful protest of orcs that were approaching Minas Tirith, and it was just it was excellent.
Is that the 40K or was that Lord of the Rings?
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. Because the 40K has orcs too, I guess. I don't know. I'm not that much of a nerd. I'm a nerd for some things, but not 40K or Lord of the Rings. I tried to read. I read the first book, Lord of the Rings. I fell asleep multiple times reading it because I got to the end and I'm like, okay, so they walked somewhere. Cool. But anyway, I'll stop shitting on Lord of the Rings. General 77 continued. He went on quite a rant. He's like, we should have Antifa militarists in every classroom. That way there's no coronavirus spreading. Minoritized groups.
Just BLM.
Yeah. Minoritized groups in any society are those defined as minorities by a dominant group that is numerically larger than the ethnic group. So that minoritized though, that's so it became a minority. Minoritized implies that some process of minoritizing has occurred, and to minoritize something means something was not a minority and was turned into one. I would assume, and that's what's bothering me. I've come across some crazy definitions that I could at least reason back and say, okay, must be the argument. I'm actually not sure where minoritized comes from. Maybe because they would argue that black people, for example, would be a majority in Africa, but they were forcibly removed from that majority and put into become a minority in the United States. Maybe? I don't know. Anyway, and he says, language is not self-contained. Postmodernists got that completely wrong. I think we can blame Chomsky for part of this. Part of this is Chomsky's issues. He raised a lot of issues about language, how he understood it, but there's a couple things he got wrong, and I think postmodernism latched on to some of those things that was taken as fact for a little bit that now we have issues with, because basically everything's been confined to the world of language, and because language is not necessarily entirely concrete, that now everything is not concrete, which is not true. And only would be true if we were just brains in jars, which sure, no one can prove we aren't, but at the same time, no one can prove that we are, so what's the point? RK Productions says, you should check out some of the comments to Kareem's tweet. I would, but unfortunately we're running up against it. But maybe some other time. That was a great tweet thread, though, by the way. That was quite fun. And then General 77 says, I think it's because race is a social construct, so people had to be assigned their races. But okay, so that's not true, because
you're using logic again. You're using logic.
No, I'm not. I'm about to use critical theory here. Get ready. So James Lindsay actually talked about this the other day. He was on Deprogrammed with, I forget the names of two people, but it's a guy who's also, he's like an IT guy, and there's I forget her name.
Yeah, but she's Unsafe Space people.
Unsafe Space, yeah, that's who runs it. The Deprogrammed, because I guess though she was like an SJW and then converted to Catholicism, I believe, and has since rejected, or maybe Protestantism, I'm not sure. But she became Christian and decided to reject the social justice narrative, and talks about it. And they interviewed James Lindsay, and basically they were like, why don't we have transracial people? Like, Rachel Dolezal happened, but she didn't really the SJWs didn't come to her defense. And the reason is because it was interesting because he made the argument that the transgender lobby versus the black liberation quote unquote lobby have characterized, they've come to their conclusions through different means, whereas the transgender community in critical theory argued that gender itself is a social construct and therefore is malleable, and that's why people can transition between sexes and genders or whatever, right? Whereas the black liberation idea through critical theory is that race is not a social construct. It actually is not, because there are lived experiences that black people have that no one else can have. Therefore, it's real. Therefore, race is real. And to attempt to say that race is a social construct actually removes power from those who are black, which is obviously against what they want. So that was an interesting. I probably butchered that a little bit, but it's definitely interesting to see how, though, like if you were saying you can't just say race is a social construct anymore, at least that's not what critical theorists say. Which is why that's why you actually look at this Brad and Chad best friends for everything. That's why that works, because they don't say race is a social construct. They say that that it's not, and therefore there are like always people who are of a certain skin color will always end up being a certain way. Cicero unfortunately had to leave early. He's on his way out. Thank you for joining us, by the way, Cicero. Appreciate that. Finishing up these last few chats, I'm going to cut us off. Says General 77 is trying to figure out their argument, but I hope that helped a little bit. The Arcade Productions then says, your head will explode trying to figure out the argument, Chernobyl-style meltdown of the mind. To tie this up, I think I want to start like a critical theory series, going over critical theory, what actually is being said. Try to take some of the stuff that James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian have been putting out and attempt to maybe like publish it for the layperson. Say, okay, you don't care about reading these academic papers. Who gives a shit? I just want to learn about this stuff in common parlance. I think I'm going to try my best to do that. That will probably be difficult, though, because unfortunately the stuff lives in an almost entirely academic world. So it's going to be interesting. I might give it a shot. It might prove impossible, at least for my meager talents. So, all right. I think that's everything. You guys have any other comments?
No, just thanks for the good time. Yeah,
this has been a lot of fun. We should definitely do this again sometime. Maybe I can come over onto your channel or something, or we can collaborate on something. But this is a great time. Thank you very much for coming on, Jordan from On the Other Hand. Again, his channel, is in the description. Definitely check his channel out. A lot of really good stuff. Again, if you are interested in any kind of politics, religion, any kind of discussion that has to do with attempting to be charitable to reasonable both sides of the argument, definitely check his channel out. And thank you very much for coming on. Alex, thanks for being here with us. And guys, have a great rest of your night. Thanks for